Hi, and welcome to TechTots, a brand new podcast brought to you by the team at Early Ideas. I'm Rob Hughes, and I'm the CEO and co-founder. And along with Alastair, we set up Early Ideas and are building Tandem.
My name's Alastair van Heerden, and it's really great to be with you today in a cold London. But Rob, maybe you can tell the listeners where we are at the moment.
Yeah, we're just in Brunswick Square Gardens in Bloomsbury. And it's a really, it's kind of an appropriate place for us to start this podcast because some people may know, but just right behind us, right there behind me, is the Foundling Museum, which was set up in the 1700s as a place where parents who couldn't look after their young children could get them looked after. And so in many ways, it's sort of, I think, probably one of the first documented examples of where we, as a society, really appreciated that early childhoods matter, children matter, and investing in their futures is something that we should be doing. And I think it's really apt because I think we both feel like that's a big part of why we set up Early Ideas, why we're building Tandem, and why we wanted to start this podcast to talk a bit more about technology in children, young children, and some of those sort of benefits, risks, things we kind of need to know as parents. All those things we'll cover a bit as we go along.
It might be helpful just to say a little bit about ourselves and how we got into this work. My really early work with children in research was as a research assistant working in South Africa, where we were trying to understand how babies recognize faces when they're really small. And I used to hide under a desk with two ping pong paddles, one that had shapes that were exactly high-tech ping pong paddles, to one that had shapes that were laid out like a face, with two squares for an eye and a line for a mouth, and another where the shapes were jumbled on the bat. And then I would hide under the desk and put a paddle up, one with the face, the other without the face, and we would then see where the baby would look. And I became fascinated in how young children learn. And
So what about your career after that, Al? Because you've done some fascinating work on technology across a whole set of different areas of, kind of health and child health.
Living in South Africa and working with people that really often don't have access to high quality healthcare, and having studied psychology, I really became excited about how technology might be able to assist people to get access to services and activities that they wouldn't have if they didn't have that technology.
And that's kind of how we got to know each other, isn't it?
That's right. I think we were thinking a bit about some of the Nairobi slums that you worked in. Maybe you want to say a bit about that, and then we can talk about what we were thinking with technology.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just touch on my kind of journey from early career to where we are today. So I started medical school and went and worked as a doctor in the UK National Health Service. But I had a really long-standing interest in kind of preventing people getting into hospital and the kind of what we sometimes talk about as the social determinants of health and the environmental determinants of health. And so that took me to the States to study public health. And then I worked overseas for the UK government's International Development Department for quite a few years in quite a fascinating variety of places, including Pakistan, Yemen, Zambia, and also in Whitehall on policy. And then after that, I got really interested in this idea of like, where does inequality kind of come from, and how does inequality get transmitted through the generations? And really, what became super clear, and I think is kind of the evidence is really strong on, is that inequality is really kind of not baked in, but it's really a lot of its roots lie in the early years and our experiences in early childhood. And, we spent a lot of time when I was working on international development looking at making sure kids were fed and kids had good nutrition. But what we probably didn't do enough of, and we maybe don't do enough of everywhere, is looking at other things that matter in early childhood, like the interactions you have and the relationships you have, how much fun and stimulating activities you have with your parent or other people in your lives who matter. So that took me to work in a period in philanthropy, and we started really asking, could technology help with some of the problems we were grappling with there, which have also been stuff that I've done in my research work at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where we're looking at children in really difficult circumstances in slums, and actually what their experiences of life look like. And we started asking the question, can technology help here?
Yep.
And we were trying to work out if it could help us understand the experiences of those children and what their lives were like and who was looking after them and the quality of care. And that, took us on a bit of a meandering journey into the kind of mysterious and fascinating and scary world of technology in early childhood. Maybe you want to tell a bit more about how that took us to this point now.
Yeah, sure. So I think that in my work, I had been focused on thinking about, often when you ask people questions directly, there's something called social desirability, and people will tell you the answers that they think you want to hear. And obviously in research, we're trying to understand what's really going on. And that led me to a really deep and strong interest in passively collecting information about behavior in a way that didn't require me to ask people to tell me about their behaviors. And that work, because of my background in psychology, focused early on in postnatal depression. So as you'll know, Rob, often after childbirth, it's a difficult time. You come home with a new child, there's no manual, and it's over to you. Often moms don't get the support they need, and it's a very risky time for mental health. And what we were interested in is whether we couldn't provide data to the people that were going to be helping those moms. So lay counselors who get trained up in cognitive behavioral therapy, could we give them information about those moms' behaviors that would be accurate and true, in a way that if you went in and said, hey, how's it going? Were you able to get some time to yourself? A mom may not feel she could give you the answer. If we could show from some passive data that she hadn't had any time alone, we could then think of ways of intervening and getting that support for her. So that was the beginnings of my interest in children and technology. And I think we were thinking about whether we could take that technology into places of childcare where maybe they would give us a bit of an insight into temperature, noise, amount of heat in a room, all those things that sometimes go hidden and behind the scenes when an official arrives to look at a healthcare center or an ECD center, which may not be the reality day to day.
Yeah, and I suppose it's worth also saying I think we then, that sort of was a gateway into this kind of bigger conversation around technology and childhoods. And it was probably about 5 years ago now, maybe it was, certainly before that. When was it? It was about 5 years ago. We working in academia, got a small grant together to actually just start some big conversations amongst quite a diverse group of people about what's going on with technology in childhood and where's the future looking like. And this was sort of before, I think now, like a lot of these conversations about AI are kind of almost every day. But it's worth remembering, even then, some of this was quite early. But the big headlines were, it's really unclear if this is going to go in a good way or a bad way or somewhere in between.
Exactly, and I was just, often when we would game out how things may play out, it was clear to us that the decision had been made. It wasn't predetermined. There was still an opportunity for people like us who have a background in the science of early childhood to contribute to make sure that technology...
Time to lean in.
Exactly. Don't stand on the sideline. Lean in and get involved and make sure that technology... I think also just thinking of social media, it was built unregulated and didn't do a lot of good, and in fact may have done some damage. And I think thinking of this as social media 3.0, the next version of it, could we do and should we be involved in ways that make sure that technology isn't harmful?
Yeah, and so anyway, this kind of kicked off a set of conversations. We had a workshop in Durban and we had a workshop in Newcastle upon Tyne and in the north of England. And really, we started to ask those questions: where is this going and what is our role in it? And at the time, both of us were full-time academics, and really, I think one of the big kind of aha moments for me was that I realized that we were at risk of if not being irrelevant, like just being so far behind the curve on this, because of the way academia works, because of the kind of almost inherent delays in doing research that we really struggle with, to the time it takes to set up apply for grants, get grants, set up grants, get the ethics approval. It was actually really it felt like we might be irrelevant, which led us to set up early ideas and actually to try and think, well, maybe we should actually get more involved in building technology and engaging with a different kind of hat on. So do you want to talk a bit about that, Al?
Sure. I think that some of the science shows that outside of nutrition and safety, the best thing that you can do for a young child is give them an opportunity for an engaging, loving, and stimulating interaction with somebody that cares for them. And the window for that young brain and its development is really quite small. And so it's not about reading at school, it's about what happens when you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that was where our thinking went to what could we build that's going to be useful for those young children and families. And what we came up with is we didn't want technology to replace human interactions. We felt that we wanted to build something that would allow people to interact with each other and be a catalyst for communication and interaction.
And it's, sorry, go on.
Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's also, the thing that really kind of shocked me a little bit into this stuff was starting to dig a little bit deeper into what we do know about the digital lives of young children.
Yeah.
And that's not always from published research, although there is some interesting research. There was a fascinating paper in Australia that suggested the average amount of digital sort of content consumed by a child was 3 hours a day, which is like mind-blowing. I mean, that might be, you know, I don't think we want to be, we're certainly not judgmental, and I don't know it's hard to sort of measure this stuff, but there certainly seems to be a thing where we've, like, young children's lives are being really affected by technology.
And just to add to that, Rob, I think being realistic that technology is in our lives, and it isn't.
And it's not going anywhere.
And we have stressful lives. It's not easy being a parent. And I think we are thinking about how can we make it a bit easier to use technology to make you a good parent and not feel guilty.
An even better parent.
You're probably an even better parent.
No, I think exactly that. And so anyway, we were not. This podcast is not like an advertising podcast. I mean, we'll talk a bit about what we're doing in terms of how we're building something we call Tandem, which is as you say, Al. I think the thing that really sets us out as being a bit different is that we're trying to build this technology that is used with human interaction, so adult-child interaction or child-child interaction, and the technology enables that, not displaces that. So we'll talk a bit about that maybe towards the end of the series, but overall on this podcast, we want to just have that conversation, start unpicking the different ways that technology is kind of creeping into early childhood, or not even creeping, running into early childhood, and what that might mean for children's health, well-being, development, and what that means for big, important questions around AI regulation, around the role of governments, around how parents can best kind of support healthy engagement with technology in the early years.
And what we hope to do is give you insight and access to some of our network. We are both long-time academics, and a lot of academics don't like necessarily talking or being on film. And I
think we find it awkward enough.
Yeah, we'll hopefully get better, but parents don't want to go read the scientific literature. And so
they've got more sense and less time than that. So
I think that hopefully on this platform we can give you access to some of those great minds that are working on these problems and make it accessible in a way that gives you practical thoughts and advice about how you may think about technology.
Yeah, I think that's basically what we're trying to do with this. We're really fortunate. We've spent some time now talking with people from across the worlds of technology, child health, development, policy, and we're going to try and bring as many of those into this little series of podcasts as we can to ask some of those kind of big questions.
And equally, I think from the technology standpoint, the world is moving fast and technology is changing quickly, and it's not always easy to keep up with those changes. And so I think hopefully we will be able to share some of the more recent advancements, what that might mean for us as people and as parents, and just create opportunities for learning without having to do all the hard digging through all those words.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll try and make it quite practical as well. We'll try and give a bit of some insights into sort of what's going on and I think one of the things that spurred us to actually get on and make this podcast was that pretty much every parent we talk to and every person who works in child health feels a little bit unsettled by the pace of this change. Feels like almost nobody feels like, I've got a really good handle on this. And that means there's a space for a public conversation. And I guess we want this to be an invitation to anyone who's listening to get in touch, join the conversation. We're new to the podcasting game, so we'll see how it goes, but we really want to make it as much of a conversation as we can.
Yeah, and as useful as we can.
And I wonder if, we maybe just to, in that vein, we should maybe do a little bit of a debrief on what we've been up to this week, Al. And particularly, we just got off the train last night from Bradford, where we've been up at the incredible Bradford Institute for Health Research, co-hosting a workshop there around what role AI might play in kind of providing support to parents. Should we maybe just, we haven't really prepared this, but give some kind of reactions or reflections on that kind of the conversations we had yesterday?
I love to, and one thing that just makes me think of is a really, really interesting study that came out of South Africa. In 1994, South Africa transitioned from an apartheid government to a free and fair democracy, and some of my early mentors were really interested in how that shift from that authoritarian state to one of democracy may impact young children, and recruited a cohort of children called Mandela's Children. I think around 3,000 moms who were pregnant, and we have now 3 generations of parents that have been interviewed. And it is in those types of cohorts, to your point, Rob, that you see how each generation and the choices they make and the opportunities they have end up influencing children's development. Bradford is doing something similar. And
they've got this incredible Born in Bradford cohort of following.
We should definitely get somebody from Bradford to maybe join us and talk a bit about it.
Yeah, we'll get Sunil on the line.
What we ended up doing at this workshop, though, was discussing how AI might be able to interact with parents and parents' needs. And we were thinking about parental support. We were thinking around safeguarding in technology. We were thinking a bit about benchmarking of LLMs and how you could give parents a bit of a sense of whether an LLM was giving you good or bad answers.
We've got a rule, Al, I think. We said we're going to have a rule. No acronyms and no tech terms without spelling them out. So tech term of the week is LLM. So Al, what is an LLM?
Well, an LLM stands for a large language model, and it's a form of AI that has been trained on all the text that you can find on the internet, and using hundreds of thousands of computers, that data gets processed and compressed and shrunk down into a set of weights, which are a bit like our brain, a neural network. And
you're getting into another term there, Albert. We'll do that next time.
Those networks and that brain is able to then process language and produce sentences that sound a lot like the kinds of sentences we produce. So an example of this is ChatGPT, which some people might have heard of.
And I guess maybe just my like, Al's more like in the deep tech than I am, but my kind of attempt at simplifying that is that it's the machine, the kind of machine that you can talk to is a one way of thinking about it.
Yep.
And it convincingly looks like it responds almost like a human. And I think it's kind of amazing how fast we've gone from it being. I still remember the first time I sat down with ChatGPT, and actually before with some of the earlier versions of GPT that we used in some of our very first work on this. And I just remember being mind blown about this is the first time that I'm interacting with a machine and it is sort of making me smile in a way that or kind of doing things that are kind of almost whimsical.
Wow.
You know, it does not feel like a calculator.
No.
And it doesn't behave like it, and it does weird things sometimes. It says weird things sometimes.
Yes.
And I think that's, to me, what that shows is that these neural networks are so complicated. We actually don't really understand exactly the route that it's not an algorithm. I think that's the thing that's it's not a sort of decision tree that says put this in, get this out. It's a little bit more complex than that.
It is.
And these combinations become almost not unknowable because people do go into them, but it's not easily explainable. But anyway, so we were talking about LLMs yesterday. We were talking about could chatbots is asking ChatGPT the new Googling. You know, we have a sort of thing in medicine where people have for quite a long time now, and certainly more and more people Google their own conditions and they try and empower themselves to, and I think there's a lot of really good things about that. There's obviously also some risks, but Googling your blood test results, which can be, sometimes you need a bit of, kind of guidance navigating those, but Googling the medical condition that you can diagnose yourself with is a thing that elicits all sorts of views from doctors, some good, some more nervous. But now is the new Googling asking ChatGPT.
Yeah, ChatGPT it.
Yeah. Or and even also, now, if you Google, you actually do. In Google, you get a Gemini, which is one of these large language models. You get a large language model summary normally of if you ask a question.
And I suppose with things like Alexa and Siri in the home, those are also slowly going to get replaced with the voice and the brains behind it being an LLM.
Yep.
And so these devices are in our phones already. And
so I guess that was our main focus yesterday, was just asking this question of what is the role of these types of technologies in kind of parenting advice and support? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? And maybe, what were your kind of top takeaways, Al? Do you have any reflections or things that really made you go, wow, and stop and think?
Well, I think the thing that really made me unsure, and I would love for people to maybe be able to comment and share with us their views, but is this concept of safeguarding, which maybe, again, not using an acronym. Maybe you want to explain what safeguarding is, Rob, and then I'll tell you what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, safeguarding is sometimes sort of, it's how we generally talk about child protection and systems to protect children. And, you know, the thing that people, I guess, most commonly come across that is, for example, in the UK, we've had a series of evolutions of our kind of safeguarding frameworks around, often prompted by failures actually, but where we look at how can we make sure that people who are interacting with children are, particularly in positions of authority, people like sports coaches, teachers, nursery workers, anyone who's regularly interacting with children, how can we make sure they're operating within a system that's safe and that identifies people who may present a risk to children? And it's both about identifying but also responses.
Okay.
So for example, we're right next to a little football pitch behind us with kids playing in this slightly grey February morning. If the football coaches here will have had to have a background check. They've had to have some training that says, you know, if any child were to disclose information about them, then here's what you need to do, and this is the legal requirement to do it. It's that type of stuff. So
okay.
we have sort of systems to try and keep children safe, I guess.
So the thing that struck me was when you're thinking about AI or large language models, what is the responsibility of those models and the companies that run those models to ensure that safeguarding is in place? To say more about that, if you Google something, if a child were to Google something about being hit or abused, Google does not report that to the police.
No.
The question that I was left grappling with is, should something that's more intelligent, like an LLM, potentially have some requirement to report something like that?
Well,
On the other hand, I was left wondering about whether that was an invasion into privacy that should not, those risks.
Yeah,
So,
and
what
it's
was
not
your
even
thought
like
on that?
Well, and it's not even that these devices are more intelligent; they're just more human-like. And I have this. We've talked about this a lot, and we'll maybe talk about this in a whole podcast. But I have this deep uncomfortableness about how children form attachments to caregivers. They form attachment to important figures in their lives, and that's a really kind of important and healthy process. But actually, when machines start resembling humans, and I don't mean resembling necessarily physically, but resembling in terms of the way they reply. They respond, they express a version of empathy and emotion, and they ask how you are, and they respond sort of appropriately. Will young children start forming attachments to machines in a way that we've never seen before in a kind of human existence? And I guess in that context, this safeguarding thing feels even more important. Because if you are a young child forming some sort of a relationship with the little speaker that sits in your corner of your bedroom, and you know, and then if you were to have something horrific going on in your life and you were to disclose that to the machine, like what would happen about
Yeah, and I mean, I think I think it really is pretty clear that is how technology companies are thinking of these new models. In social media with Facebook and Instagram, what the companies were after was your attention. They were trying to get you to scroll endlessly and spend time with your eyes on the screen so that they could sell you adverts.
Yeah.
What I think is going to happen with this new variety of technologies is that they're going to be selling intimacy, trying to create relationships with you, because that is a very deep evolutionary imperative and need. And once you had that relationship, you've got that person in your back pocket to sell them whatever it is that you want.
That's a bit of a dystopian angle. I mean, I think there's also slightly more positive takes on this. There's a sort of can some of these technologies, this is going a bit beyond childhood, but can they solve the kind of loneliness epidemic we have?
That's
I don't
true.
know.
That's
I don't
true.
want to go too much into that though, because it's a bit of a that's probably a different podcast.
It is, but these are the types of things
Yeah.
that you start to go down, and as we were saying, you can see utopian and dystopian futures, and why we want to discuss with people. Because at the end of the day, I believe that people should be making decisions about how they want technology to serve,
Yeah.
and not just leave it to big companies to decide for us.
Totally. And actually that was like one of my biggest reflections, actually, I was thinking as we were on the train down last night, was around the conversation we sort of started the day on. Because we started with a bit of like trying to sort of get a sense of where everyone in the room was and where everyone was on the capabilities of these technologies. And I think it's a really nice sort of explanation of why we're doing the podcast. Because what I think blew my mind is we started trying to sort of test the boundaries, and we had this like, game of saying AI will never. And AI will never be able to, and we had to sort of complete the sentence. And what was out, like, kind of a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for many of us in the room, was just how far we went with that. Like, the point we got to was that AI will never be able to kind of replace the sense that it is my mother. Like, and it was only at that sort of soul level. I think I didn't explain that well, but we were saying how people in the room felt that it was very clear AI was going to start looking like it could emulate a caregiver in terms of voice.
Yeah.
It could emulate in terms of emotion. But the only thing like that would differentiate would be a sort of
That didn't have
intangible sense of somebody's soul.
A metaphysical level.
Yeah, and like the idea that these computers are going to start becoming so close to people that the only thing we can kind of hold on to is the sense that we'll sort of know they're not human was kind of
And
kind of wild.
on the train down from Bradford last night, Geoffrey Hinton, who's often called the godfather of AI, I was listening to him argue for the fact that many of these LLMs already are displaying signs of consciousness, which is just wild to even try and grapple with what that means.
Yeah. Wow. So it's a kind of wild field that's moving really fast. We're not going to get too into the sort of, we're going to try, this is not a sort of tech podcast in that it's not we're not going to go into the sort of frontiers of tech too much. We're going to try and keep it quite grounded and practical. We're also going to try and make sure that it's not going to be too long. These aren't 3-hour-long podcasts.
No.
But particularly the people we want to visit parents and others who are interested in children's well-being. And I think one of the things we've realised is that most of us are a bit time poor, so we're going to try and keep it kind of short and sweet. So we'll probably wrap it up there. But I hope you'll join us for the journey. Follow along. Please, if it's interesting, please share it with your friends. Please get in touch with us if there's things you want us to try and dig into and explain. And we look forward to joining you for episode 2 of TechTots next time.
Bye, everyone. Nice.